Hello there guys, and welcome back to the channel. So in today's video I'm going to be trying to give some decent useful tips, hopefully, for how to do better in Battlegrounds overall. And you by no means are enticed to see everything that I say as some sort of absolute truth. In reality, there are several different takes, several different strategies, several different trains of thought that all can be perfectly viable. This is more so the principles that I use when I'm playing Battlegrounds, and they do seem to be working out for me relatively fine so far. So first we're going to be talking about the decks in general. And without getting into like specifics of which champions are good for this meta, because we're about to change this Battlegrounds is going to go away in a couple of days, and then in April we're probably going to have different nodes, and then we're going to need to use different champions, so on and so forth. But there is a very simple mathematical principle, because as soon as deck building got involved in Model Concept Champions, it was a bit of a dream come true for me, because I started playing Model Concept Champions after over a decade of playing Yu-Gi-Oh! TCG, which is a trading card game. And a lot of TCG principles now apply to this game mode, because they also involve deck building and usage of, effectively cards that we can control. So that being said, you need to note that when you ban a champion, that champion is banned on both sides. So if you ban opponent's Human Torch, your own Human Torch gets banned. When you ban opponent's Archangel, your own Archangel gets banned. Now, it's not specifically which champions you ban. It's the idea that I want to ban champions on opponent's deck that I myself hold. And the reason for that is because that whittles down my deck size. It's very simple as that. The smaller my deck, the better chance I have to get to a specific champion that I will be looking for. And also, as a generic fact, even if you're not looking for any champion in particular, all champions are not created equal. There are some champions in your deck that you do not use or rely as much as you do with others. And the less cards, less champions you have remaining, the better chance you have to see them pop up whenever you need to draft. So with some exceptions, for instance, I will always ban Tigra against Finn, even if I don't myself main Tigra at the moment. Or I will always ban, I don't know, a rank 3 6-200 Omega Red, because it blitzes through some of my defenders that I rely on most really quick, and that's a problem. But in general, when I pick the bans, I virtually almost always pick the champions that I have in my own deck. So the math then in ideal world will work out where I ban 3 champions from opponent's deck that I have myself. That means we're both down to 27 champions in our decks. And ideally, if opponent bans 3 champions that only I have and he doesn't, he's playing with a deck of 27, and I'm playing with a deck of 24. And that is a significant enough difference that you will over time notice that you get the champions that you want more often than opponent would, for instance. And your drafts just seem to be more consistent. It's, again, I do not want to bore you to go through all the mathematical and statistical numbers, but it's kind of basically one of the Yu-Gi-Oh! TCG card game rules, where you want your deck to be as small as possible. And then in Yu-Gi-Oh! TCG, you also use so-called 1-for-1s and filler cards and search cards that kind of lets you whittle the deck size even further. And the cards that don't have purpose on their own, just to shorten and, well, basically reduce the size of your deck. In here, we do not have that available aside from reshuffle, but we do have the basic strategy available, thanks to bans, on having a smaller deck size than the opponent, which is virtually almost always really helpful. So that's the key point with the bans. You want to ban champions that you have in your own deck, ideally. Second thing is to do with scoring. You need to understand that with current scoring system, time is absolutely crucial. Now, many players have picked up Liquid Courage Double Edge because of that, just so they can finish fights significantly quicker than their opponents can, and even if they finish with lower health, they still end up winning the fights, which is currently the strategy that I'm kind of working with as well. It will not be possible with different nodes because currently masochism is helping, but for now, this strategy works. But overall, you need to basically figure out that that is exactly what matters. Not how hard the defender is, nothing else, because once you kind of climb higher, most of your defenders are going to get KO'd. It's a question of how quickly and how much damage opponent's going to take. So when you choose your defenders, it's also quite important to understand that you're looking for two things specifically. Number one, how long they can delay the fight. Number two, whether they do have some source of dealing some damage back to the attacker that's hard to avoid. Like, for instance, either Ebony Maw or Mojo or even Iceman to a degree. If opponent doesn't have Cold Snap Immune Champion, just the fact that Iceman is going to whittle down opponent's health before he gets KO'd is super helpful to you. Currently, the point transition works where 3% of your health is worth about 4-second fight duration. And you can use that knowledge in virtually both factors, attacking and defending. Sometimes it's worth taking extra chip damage just to get the fight done quicker. And likewise, it's important to keep as much health if you can do the fight still relatively quick. Great example here as a champion is, for instance, Magneto. Magneto is a perfect counter for a ton of things, and Magneto is one of the dominant, attackers at the moment in this game mode. But it does come with its own weakness. Magneto does not have the quickest playstyle. And now, considering that you need to work on masochism and you need to reparry and, it can take a while, Magneto takes time to finish even a perfect matchup. And you can use the fact, if you are confident, that your counter can do the fight faster. Because with Magneto, like a standard is where opponent tries to get level 3 and then drop the level 3 and then you need to wait out the animation. And typical Magneto fight's probably going to last 50 seconds, 40 some seconds. And even if he doesn't take any chip damage, that's already plenty of points lost. So you should not be afraid to bait out, so to speak, opponent's Magneto on a defender that Magneto can handle if you are confident in taking down the defender that your opponent's placed quicker than the Magneto could. In a perfect way, for instance, opponent places a defender, let's say it's Killmonger. And you have CGR to nuke down that Killmonger in 30 seconds without taking any significant damage. And in that case, it often can be quite clever to actually put on a defender that Magneto is good against. Especially maybe Iron Man Infinity War, who has fairly, slow and long special attacks that the opponent would need to evade. Because it's going to take time for him to get to that level 3 with the max. If you can nuke down the CGR quicker, you win the fight. Those are things that you need to look at when drafting and when setting up defensive and offensive placements. Even if opponent might have a perfect counter, speed, for instance, matters. Or similarly, for instance, if opponent has placed Man-Thing and you have somebody like Overseer, you realize that you're going to be healing the entire fight and you can finish out the fight fairly quickly and almost always with 100% health bar. So you can place less than, let's say, perfect defensive option, and you're still likely going to win that match just because you can heal throughout the fight. There are many matchups, many interactions like I just described, but all of that matters. You do really need to think about, not just in a basic sense of whether I'm placing a tough defender and whether I can take down this attacker, but you need to think about exactly how scoring system works and which one of you is likely to be faster, which one of you is likely to have more health remaining, and based on that, you can alter which defenders you place. Alternatively, it's also important to realize when you have lost a matchup, even if you have great, basically looking at this same thing in reverse. Even when opponent throws down, even if an opponent throws down a defender that you know for sure you can KO quite quickly, but you do not have defensive option that opponent couldn't KO quicker. It's quite important sometimes to just throw the fight and maybe do not place your best defender, but place somebody else, just so you have an option for the next round. So at times it is quite important to give a round away to maintain better defensive and offensive options for later on in the fight. So that should have been a separate point, but we're going to treat it as point 2.5, when being able to work the scoring system should also work as ability to know when to throw a fight to hopefully win the match. Right. So those main things put aside, the last one has to do with drafting. Now there are several strategies, obviously, with your deck building and drafting in general, but as a couple of simple rules, you need to understand that if you are picking a champion first, it's good to give opponent a puzzle. Because if you are picking a champion first, and if you do have a very troublesome defender, opponent is going to be preoccupied with looking for an answer for that defender, which might trigger their, which might hinder their defensive options when they choose their picks. So as a small tip, whenever you are picking first, even if you see a perfect offensive champion, it's always nice to pick a defender, if it is one of your key defenders, just to have opponent thinking about it and working on it and trying to solve a puzzle. Because if you just pick a good attacker, opponent is going to be in his element. If you give opponent a puzzle to work on from the very beginning, then they will have to keep that in mind from the very first pick they make. If you pick attacker, opponent will already know which attacker you have picked and can purposely pick defenders that are good against that one attacker. So if you pick first, typically it is a very good idea to pick up a defender rather than an attacker. Hope that makes sense. Likewise, when you get the last pick, when you get the very, very, very last pick, unless you are seeking for an answer to a very specific defender that you are unable to do well against, it is very advantageous to pick a defender again. Why? Because opponent will not have a chance to draft after you. And if he does not already have a great option for that defender, you're probably going to win that match when you put the defender down. As good example, for instance, would be here Cersei. Now, Cersei is an absolute tank on defense, which is very, very vulnerable to Mystic champions who can, nullify all her glancing and just destroy them. So if the draft has gone in such a way where opponent does not have many or any Mystic champions, then picking Cersei at the very end will likely give you the win for the round where you put down Cersei. It's similar with King Groot, for instance, and if opponent doesn't have many, Mystic defenders, or if opponent doesn't have an answer for Thing, and you pick Thing as your very last champion, perfect. He's going to guaranteed struggle because he does not have a chance to respond. So it's very important to understand exactly how the rules work. So when you are working first, when you are picking first, again, it's very good to start with the defender, just to give opponent a puzzle to work on, puzzle to try and counter. And when you are picking last, again, it's very advantageous with your last draft to get in a defender pick, because opponent does not have an opportunity to respond. And as a last small side piece, it's very crucial to understand small specific interactions. Now, I have mentioned, for instance, this one in the past, where King Groot is virtually almost always looked at as, sorry, where's my King Groot? Virtually almost always looked at as a defender, and rightfully so, because he's beefy. But if opponent places a robot, King Groot's level 2 absolutely melts down that robot. It's quite simple as that. So King Groot can, you can keep your King Groot to your heart an opponent can maybe think that he's kind of like cornered you, and then King Root can come in and shine. So it's very important to understand all of these specifics of your champions. Similarly, for instance, Domino. Opponent will look at the Domino primarily as a defender always. But guess what? He can nuke down opponents very, very quickly. And if opponent has, for instance, picked some, skill champions or some champions that he thinks you're going to take a lot of time with, it's a very decent idea to flip out the Domino on offense. Similar, for instance, is Bishop. Bishop does a ton of damage and passively stuns the opponent whenever the opposing champion shrugs off the debuffs. So against Kingpin, you can absolutely destroy opponents by throwing level 1 with Bishop and having Bishop purify those incinerates all the time. He's going to be taking a ton of damage immediately. It's kind of similar with Mole Man too. He hasn't entered Frenzy. And even though opponent's going to be looking at Bishop primarily as a defender, if you notice that opponent has already drafted, let's say, Kingpin or Mole Man, you can just flip out your Bishop and completely nuke those guys down. So there are several champion kind of interactions like that as well, where you can be well aware of your champion capabilities. Like you can win fights with Man-Thing, for instance, against Mysterio, because you armor break and then poison. If you remember that Man-Thing was the original counter to Acid Wash Mysterio, right? And so on and so forth. So you need to understand your defender's offensive capabilities as well. I guess that would be the potential last point to say. Figure out exactly which of your defenders still can put in plenty of work on offense. And that's it. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope it has been useful. I will carry on trying to make as many videos about Battlegrounds overall as I can. Obviously, they are going to go away for 2 weeks, but they're going to be back in April. It's going to be interesting to see how they return. But meanwhile, let's get to Battlegrounds and have some fun. See you guys. Hello there guys, and welcome back to the channel. So we have all the information about